I'm Glenn Campbell. I call myself a demographic philosopher. I'm looking at life and trying to predict the future through the lens of demography, or the study of human populations. In this issue of my podcast, I'm going to talk about something completely different: UFOs. And I'm going to talk about the relevance of UFOs to the subject of this podcast, demography and macroeconomics. And spoiler alert, guess what? There is not any connection that I can find between UFOs and demography or macroeconomics. And that's the whole point here. That's why I've picked up the microphone. I want to tell you how much irrelevance UFOs have to the subjects I've been talking about. But I'm going to do it with some nuance and do it at length because it's still an amusing topic, even if it's unrelated to my main topics. So why am I talking about it right now? First of all, where am I? I'm in a car on the edge of a cornfield in South Carolina, and it's 2 a.m. and I just woke up and I just decided I should do a podcast on UFOs in my demography podcast. And there are two things that prompted this. One was a recent news story from reputable outlets like the New York Times and 60 Minutes, indicating that UFOs are real after all, that there seems to be some solid military evidence of craft operating in Earth's environment that far exceeds anything that humankind is capable of. And these craft are described as tic-tacs, oblong white objects without any definition, about the size of a commercial airliner. Military equipment can get a lock on them, can see them. You have visual evidence and radar evidence. They're real. They can travel at enormous speed in air and in water. And after we've discussed UFOs for decades now, it turns out some of them might be real. So that's one thing that prompted this podcast episode. The other one was that I bought a drone. About 3 weeks ago, I bought a drone. The drone technology has finally advanced to the stage where I feel comfortable buying one, knowing that I'm not going to lose it tomorrow, because these drones are quite sophisticated about coming back home. And I've started to explore my environment with this drone, which is mostly done through the controller. Once your drone goes up into the air, this thing has a huge range. It can fly for a half an hour, and it can go up to several miles away from where I am, and it can plop itself down in some other environment, just like a UFO, just like an alien. And something I did a couple of days ago is I saw some cows off in the distance from where I was sitting. So I launched my drone, and my drone went over and talked to the cows. And the cows, for the first time, I had some response to my drone. The cows looked up at my drone. And what I did is I came down in the field about 8 feet above the ground, and the cows started to circle around me. And they looked at me, and as they walked toward me and wondered, what is this thing in their environment? And from their perspective, it is a UFO. It is something that's there. It's definitely real. That my drone is definitely real. It's not a bird. It's operating in a way that they've never seen before. And it's fascinating to them. But it's also far beyond their comprehension. I can never explain my drone to a cow. It's just impossible. They have no frame of reference to understand where this craft has come from or why it is there. All they know is that it is there. And my aha moment just now is that okay, well, this is what the UFO phenomena is like to humans. Those tic tac objects seen by military pilots, they are pretty much like my drone. They have some sort of purpose, but it is way beyond our little cow brains to understand what that purpose is. And it's almost futile to try. Beyond just noting that these things exist, you could have cows talking to each other and talking about what this thing is. And some cows say to the other cows, "Oh, you're crazy. There's no such thing." But we know that my drone definitely exists. It came down and the cows gathered around, and I kind of responded to them because as they're coming to look at me, I'm going down to look at them. So I'm exhibiting some form of intelligence. It's just my goals in launching my drone and coming to visit them are just beyond their ability to process. So that is the final conclusion of my UFO investigation, is that yes, they're real, but they're not relevant to our life on Earth, which is the whole reason I finally got out of UFOs in my own life. Now, I'm speaking to you as someone who's been into it a lot more than most people have. There was a time in the 1990s when I called myself a UFO researcher, and I got some publicity and some renown as a UFO researcher. It started back in my youth when in my teenage years in the 1970s, when I was into science fiction and got into the UFO literature at the time, which was really pretty thin. There was only a handful of incidents, but a few books. I read all of the books that were available at the time. But I realized that as a teenager, really, I got into the UFO thing just for the same reason I got into science fiction, for the escapism, to escape from my dreary life in a small town. I got into science fiction and UFOs. And as I grew up and emerged into the larger world, I discarded them as irrelevant, not important. They could be real, but they're not important to my real adult life. So I discarded them for a couple of decades, and I came back to UFOs around 1990 after I'd been reasonably successful in the software business and had some money and some time. I thought it would be cool to get back into UFOs again. And I didn't see them as any more relevant than I did in my teenage years, but it was a fascinating mystery. To me, it was like a puzzle to be figured out, because I knew that 99% of the UFO claims were false, were misjudgments in some way by the human brain. But that didn't mean that there wasn't 1% out there that were real. And that 1% I saw as, just the fact that any of this, any one instant is real, ought to be earth-shattering. So in the beginning, I got into it in the 1990s as an intellectual challenge because I had time on my hands and I wanted to see if there was any signal in all of this noise. And to cut a long story short, I was attracted to Area 51, which was supposedly a place where you could see UFOs on demand on a scheduled basis. I went to investigate them, and this became my whole cause célèbre for the next 5 years or so. I became an expert on Area 51, as much as anyone could be. And I was really much more focused on the human aspects of this very real place. I got some recognition. I got some fame for it. My 15 minutes of fame turned into 45 minutes of fame. I got on a lot of TV shows, which went on for years. And it became a source of my identity, at least my public identity. That's how most of the world would know me as this publicist for Area 51. But the UFOs themselves, I always kept at arm's length. And my position on UFOs has almost always been they're just not relevant. They could be real. Certainly, the vast majority of UFO reports are not real. A handful of them could be real. But even if they're just not relevant to my life on Earth. And eventually I exploited everything I could exploit at Area 51. I learned an awful lot about many human subjects. It was like a graduate level program on a lot of other things like law and government and psychology and media. I learned so much about how media works. But it ran its course and I withdrew. I moved on to other things. And now here UFOs are back. So now and they seem to be real. Some little sliver of the UFO literature seems to be real. And now what do I do about it? And I can only interpret UFOs in terms of what is important to me. And what is important to me right now is demographics, the demographic crises that we are facing. Crises like not enough babies and not enough quality in our upbringing of babies, and all of the macroeconomic problems that arise from not having enough babies, which is the looming monetary crisis that is coming about here, basically because our demographics are tapped out. We don't have the demographic growth that we used to have. So how does these Tic Tacs operating in the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, cited by military pilots, how does that relevant to any of the problems I'm talking about? And it just isn't. So I'm like those cows. When this drone arrives, this weird alien craft arrives in their environment, I'm going to take notice of it. I'm going to note it down in my little cow brain. But when the object goes away again, I'm going to go back to munching grass, because that's what cows do. And and when the UFOs, there's no article in the New York Times about UFOs. Well, I just go back to my version of munching grass, which is working on the human problems that humans have created and that only humans can solve. So let's say that these aliens do have this fantastic technology that can do all these amazing things, and it implies that all sorts of technological advances beyond what we can do. That doesn't have any relevance on our production of babies. It doesn't have any relevance to our monetary system, because I can't even imagine any way that alien creatures could fix our economy or fix our politics. Now, aliens could come along and knock out a couple of dictators. Let's say I had the power of the aliens at my disposal. There's a few dictators I like to dispose of, but I don't have any illusions that that's going to fix the problems of humanity. I won't name those dictators, but you can imagine some of the dictators I like to remove just to free their people and give their people a second chance. But I have no guarantee that by giving people a second chance, they're not going to create new dictators. It's just not simple. The aliens just can't come in from space and zap somebody with a bolt of lightning and fix anything, because humans have their own problems, have created their own problems. And if the problems are solvable at all, only humans can solve them. And we can't expect anything from aliens. Now, what relevance do they have to the military? Well, the military is a little bit more interested in UFOs because these things could be mistaken for adversaries. What if this isn't these UFOs reported are not alien craft, but in fact are Russian or Chinese craft? Well, that's something we should be concerned about. And the main thing that the military should be concerned about is that these aliens, which we have no reason to believe are threatening, are not mistaken for things that are threatening. So the military does have a stake in identifying at least whether or not this thing is a threat or not. Once it is determined that these things are not threatening, then it's not a military problem. It might be a scientific issue, but even there, what's more important? Is it more important to investigate UFOs or to investigate some medical issue that might actually save lives? You decide. I don't think aliens are worth too much of my time. But like the cows, if an alien flies by me or the New York Times reports on the aliens, I'm going to look up and I'm going to at least take some passing interest. So I've said a lot of other things about Area 51. If you want a capsule of my Area 51 research, I never saw anything or experienced anything that I couldn't eventually explain. But there were things that took me a while to explain. They were lights in the sky that took me a while to explain. I eventually did. There were credible sounding claims made by people like Bob Lazar and Bill Uhouse, claiming to have worked with or seen alien craft. Those stories, I take the same agnostic position. I don't know if they're real or not real, but they're not worth my time to investigate. In the case of those two people, Bob Lazar, Bill Uhouse, these characters are so unreliable and so sociopathic that it's just not worth my time to investigate, even if they did hold all the secrets of the universe. Instead of talking about any specific UFO case, I'd much rather talk about the philosophy of UFOs, or more broadly, the philosophy of the unknown. The universe is full of unknowns. Imagine talking to a Roman of 2,000 years ago, and he came from a reasonably sophisticated society. But if you tried to explain our science and technology to him, he would just be blown away. He would regard much of it as paranormal because it's just so far beyond his understanding. So there's plenty of science and technology yet to be discovered. And in fact, it's pretty much an infinite quest. Science goes on indefinitely. You can dump as much resources into science and technology as you have, and there'll never be an end to it. And unfortunately, I don't have infinite patience for these infinite quests, especially personally. Following my cancer treatment and my near-death experiences over the past couple of years, I've entered what I call the third half of my life. And I want to make the most of the time I have left. And one thing I've learned about UFOs is they will absorb all of your time and give you nothing in return. So for me, these kind of quests just aren't worth the effort. They're not worth my limited time. And the same applies to paranormal phenomenon, paranormal research. There could be something there. There have been a few inklings over the years that some psychic phenomena are real. For example, remote viewing seemed to have promise for a while, but the more you study these things, the more they seem to just slip away. One thing I can say about both UFOs and psychic phenomena is that they're not reliable. They don't perform on demand, so you can't really use them for anything. You might have a psychic hunch that prompts you to turn your head and look in a certain direction. And that can be useful in itself, but you can't use those psychic hunches to make substantial personal decisions, or you're going to get yourself into trouble. You have to rely on the things you know for sure. Until UFOs and psychic phenomena start becoming reliable, I've got to make my decisions based on concrete things, based on solid reasoning and evidence that I can verify. And one of the reasons I'm attracted to demography is that there are a lot of things that you can know for sure. For example, you can know for sure that there won't be more future adults on the planet than there are children right now. I also contend that there are things you can know for sure about macroeconomics, mainly that you can't spend more money than you make, that no government or other entity can consistently spend more money than they make without something bad happening. You have to pay the piper sometime. UFOs offer no such certainties. In fact, they yield hardly any useful information at all, even if you believe in specific cases. Let's say something weird happens, and it is corroborated by a lot of different sources. Where do you go from there? If you're a cow and you experience my drone for the first time, or even multiple times, what do you do with that information? Well, probably what you're going to do is you're going to twist it around in such a way that it's meaningful to you, and that makes you the center of the experience. You're probably going to attribute to my drone some kind of intent that simply wasn't there. A useful analogy here is the cargo cults of the South Pacific. This was a real phenomenon that took place during World War II. There were Pacific Islanders who had hardly ever seen an outsider before, and all of that changed during the war. Soldiers arrived in boats and they built airfields, and then the most fantastic UFOs would land on those airfields. Of course, we know what those UFOs were. They were airplanes involved in the war effort against Japan. But to the islanders, the planes were something totally alien, as were these pale-skinned aliens in uniforms who operated the planes. So the airfield on this remote island might have operated for a year or two, and then the aliens just packed up and left as swiftly and mysteriously as they arrived. So if you're one of these islanders left behind, you're left to wonder what just happened. And that's where the cargo cults came in. People began to worship these aliens and worship these craft. They drew moral lessons from the aliens coming and the aliens departing, and they prayed to the aliens to come back. And these people built their own planes. You can see them by Googling for cargo cult. Do a visual image search for cargo cult, and you see the planes that these Pacific Islanders built. They were built out of jungle materials, and they certainly wouldn't fly, but they looked like the planes that these people had seen, looked like the UFOs that these people had seen. And the classic photos that you'll see online are these half-naked islanders sitting under the wings of the plane they had built, presumably waiting for the aliens to return. In essence, they had created a religion from their anomalous experience, which is probably the way that most religions start. Something weird happens, and people interpret it in such a way as to serve their own emotional needs. If UFOs did not exist, we humans would almost certainly invent them, and we would imbue in them all of our hopes and fears. That's just the way humans work. They need paranormal beliefs. They need this means of wish fulfillment that allows them to carry on with their lives. We as Westerners can look at those cargo cults and laugh, because we know what those planes are, we know what those alien craft are, and we know that they have nothing to do with the islanders. But we can laugh only because we see the big picture. The islanders did not see the big picture. They just saw little bits of the picture, and they filled in all the rest according to their emotional needs. When the aliens arrived, it must have been some kind of reward or punishment for what they had done. And likewise, when the aliens left. And when the aliens left, it left a hole in their society, and they filled it up with this cargo cult religion. When a religion is born, certain individuals in the community are going to set themselves up as priests, because there's a lot of power in being a spokesman for God. And the rest of the people seem content in just following these priests. In the case of the cargo cults, priests would declare their power by wearing the uniforms of the soldiers who ran the aircraft. And you could see pictures of this on Google as well. The highest priests would have a lot of medals on their chests. So they're reproducing all the symbols of this alien encounter without any of the underlying understanding. Now, the priests might genuinely believe that they have a special connection with the aliens, but this is also a golden opportunity for swindlers and con men. You can gain a lot of power in your community without a lot of work by just claiming to have a psychic channel to the aliens. Believe it or not, many humans are liars, and some of them are really good at it. And realizing an opportunity to exploit others, they're quick to take advantage of it. Other people aren't liars per se, as much as confabulators. They fill in the blanks between the actual data and what they emotionally need to believe. And these people are genuine in their belief in the aliens. They're just twisting things around to serve their own needs. Most people, however, are simply followers. They look up to the experts in their community to tell them what to believe, and they're remarkably gullible in believing both the liars and the confabulators. Of course, this whole thing has been happening in the UFO field for years. UFOs offer a big umbrella for all sorts of fantastic claims, only a tiny fraction of which can possibly be true. The field is a wonderful opportunity for sociopaths and wishful thinkers and confabulators of all kinds, because anyone can claim anything and it can't be easily disproved, because essentially you've suspended all the laws of reason and physics. That's what makes the UFO field so murky and dismissible. Virtually anything goes, and any genuine signal that might have been there is quickly overwhelmed by noise. Science might have made a lot more progress on UFOs if the claims had been limited to objects identified by military hardware. But unfortunately, UFO claims have come to include everything under the sun. What people see in UFOs is more a reflection of their own emotional needs than what's really out there. Conspiracists will see government conspiracies. Spiritualists will feel they're in psychic communication with the aliens. Hardcore mechanical people are going to be more interested in the hardware, the flying saucers or wherever, and they're hardly interested in aliens at all. It all depends on your personality and what your emotional needs are. Attending a UFO conference is a mind-numbing experience because, unlike a genuine science, there are no standards for truth in the UFO field. Whatever comes out of people's mouths seems worthy of attention. At a UFO conference, we have all these high priests, each peddling their own theories with absolute certainty, usually with themselves at the center of the cult. Like any other convention, a UFO conference tends to revolve around these big names who get star billing and who the UFO believers come to see. So that's how people work. They come to see their high priests, and the phenomenon itself is kind of lost behind all the religious ritual. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe the military style claims, which basically go, we were out on patrol, we saw this thing, we recorded it on video, and we got a lock on it in our targeting system. This object responded to us in some way, and then it took off. It took off at enormous speed. That's a lot like my drone encounter with the cows. That's how the cows would explain my drone encounter. And that's plausible to me. I'm less inclined to believe the personal UFO stories. That's where someone says, the aliens came and abducted me, and they came and communicated with me like I was some sort of really important person. And that just doesn't hold water for me. It could be true. It's just not something I want to explore. It's like the cows in my drone. As the operator of the drone, I'm the intelligence behind it. And I know what I'm thinking. I'm amused by the cows. I'm willing to play with the cows a little bit, respond to them, respond to what they do. But I'm not here for any particular cow, and I'm not trying to communicate with any particular cow or appoint any cow my representative on Earth. Cows are they're all generic to me. And that's probably how the aliens see humans. Humans are all generic, and there's no human that's special that deserves my attention. So I may be inclined to believe some UFO reports and disinclined to believe others, but belief for me is not a binary condition. I don't see things as true or false. I take a more pragmatic approach. The only question I ask is this claim worthy of my time compared to all the other things I could be doing with my time? I don't want to pass judgment on the claim, and I'm not eager to tell someone that their claim is false. I'm just wondering what I can do with the claim and whether it's worth any investment of my own time. In the case of Area 51, there were quite a few claims that we could do something about. For example, if someone saw a light in the sky above a certain military area, well, at least we could investigate that area and determine what the humans normally use that area for. If it's for war games, then that light in the sky probably has something to do with war games. But these days, I'm not even motivated that much. If someone tells me they saw a light in the sky over Area 51, I'm just not going to even bother investing in it because I've got my own plan for the rest of my life. And there are things I want to accomplish in non-paranormal fields. And it would take a huge inducement for me to deviate from that plan. Now, if I'm driving along a highway and I see an inexplicable light up in the sky, I'm certainly going to pull over and check it out. And I'm going to try my best to photograph it. But I'm probably not going to go out of my way to deliberately hunt for these things. Personally, I've got more important things to do. I think that's also the position of the military. Once it is determined that UFOs are not a threat, not a military threat, it's really not a military problem anymore. And once you take away that anchor of military utility, any research program that you start is going to just absorb all your resources and not get anywhere. I think that's what doomed most of these military projects like Project Blue Book. It's not that they didn't have enough data, it's that they had too much data and nothing to do with it, and nothing that really indicated a military threat. So if I were a military leader, even a military leader who believed in UFOs, I would ask myself, what are we doing in this field? This is not our business. Our business is defending the country, and if the UFOs aren't a threat to our defense, then it's not our business. It's someone else's business. So the one thing you can say about the aliens is that they are keeping their distance. They seem to be obeying the prime directive of Star Trek in that they're not intervening in our society in any obvious ways. All the problems of humanity so far seem to be human-generated problems, and the aliens have shown no inclination to either hurt us or protect us from ourselves. They seem to be doing their own thing, and whatever that may be, I'm inclined to just let them do it.